Belkin Art Gallery, thank you so much for coming, and welcome to our current exhibition, Breathless Days, 1959 to 1960. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome members of the School of Music and the UBC Contemporary Players here today. We hope that this is the beginning of a long, provocative, fruitful collaboration. So this is the first of many of this kind of laboratory here. I'd like to especially thank David Metzer and Corey Ham, who are delightful to work with and have put together this enticing program for us today. If you haven't had a chance yet today to walk through and see the show, you have until June 2nd to do so I welcome you to enjoy the show. And I'd like to invite you as well to a number of other events we have affiliated with Breathless Days. There will be a conference May 1st and 2nd and May 7th, hosted by Art History and Visual Arts. And you're all cordially invited to the opening reception for this show on that Saturday evening, 5:30 to 7. You're invited as well to two sets of conversations we're having here at the gallery next Wednesday and 2 weeks after that. One on architecture and film with Sherry McKay from Architecture, Carlo Testa from Italian, and another on jazz and poetry with David Metzer and Fred Waugh. And as well, you may have noticed the double bill at the Cinematheque, Psycho and Breathless on May 2nd and 3rd. I'd also like to acknowledge Tom Lee for generously loaning us this beautiful instrument. Thank you all and enjoy the concert.
My name is David Metzer. I'm in the Faculty of School of Music, as Shelley said. I'm a music historian who specializes in late 20th century music, so this is perfect for us. Actually, we were quite thrilled when we heard this would be the first show, the topic for the first show. But for years, a lot of us in the School of Music, and I know people at the gallery, have always been talking about it would be wonderful to put on concerts or shows and to do something at the gallery. And that's all that remained, was just talk. Nothing ever happened until we had someone with the organizational moxie, Shelley to actually make this happen. So it has happened. It's quite a thrill. So Corey and I have put together this program which we're trying to capture different facets of music in the 1950s and 1960s, both in Europe, the US, and Canada. So we're going to walk through a variety of pieces today. I think it's a diverse program we have. And I'm going to just say a few words to introduce each piece as they come along. So our first piece, we're going to start off with ground that's not covered in the show itself. And this is ground that's pretty far afield. We're going to be beginning in Hungary in the early 1950s with the composer György Ligeti, one of the leading composers of the second half of the 20th century. And these pieces are interesting. Ligeti wrote these pieces, as they say, for the desk. He never meant these pieces to be performed. He kept them to himself. And why did he do that? They violated really the aesthetic of the time. At that time, Ligeti was expected to write pieces that used a lot of folklore in them and pieces that could be easily appreciated by the masses, by the general audience. And Ligeti wanted alternatives to that. So these pieces are definitely that. The thing that stands out about them is how austere they are. No better example being the first piece. The first piece involves one note, just the pitch A in different octaves, but that's all it is for 2 minutes, is just one note. We're doing 6 of the pieces from an 11 movement set. Some of these pieces do have folk music elements into them. The second movement, for instance, is a lament type piece, which Ligeti knew the genre of the folk lament quite well, and will evoke it in the second movement. And the fourth movement, you can see the waltz piece is based on an organ grinder that he would hear in the streets in Budapest, and he decided to evoke that as well. And some of the other movements, though, are just as austere and quite difficult and very evocative as the first movement is itself. So we're quite fortunate today to have a wonderful young pianist in our piano program, and that's Robin Jacob. Robin is a pianist devoted to contemporary music, as she was telling me beforehand. So she plays in Contemporary Players, but that's definitely the path that she wants to follow with her career as a performer, too. So we're quite fortunate to have someone like her devote herself to this piece, which she's been working on for a few years now, and to bring it to us. So thank you, Robin. significant changes, as did his compositional approach. So in 1956, he fled Hungary after the suppression of the revolt in Hungary by the Soviet Union. And he and his wife crossed the border and made their way to Vienna. But all the time he knew where he wanted to go, and that was to Cologne and to work in an electronic music studio in Cologne. In Hungary, he could get some radio work from Germany and all that. He knew there was one hot place in Europe at that time for modern music, and that was Cologne in the electronic music studio, especially working with the composer Karlheinz Stockhausen. So he was in Vienna for a few months and then made his way to Cologne. Once he got there, he started to work with Stockhausen and did what Stockhausen was doing at the time, and that was to produce electronic pieces. And he also picked up on Stockhausen's interests. Stockhausen at the time, like a few other composers in the studio, were interested in the relationship between sound, music, and language. And we're working on a fluid relationship between all three of those areas. So Stockhausen incorporated voices as his own piece. In this work, Ligeti decided to create a language through electronic sound. So the idea of the piece was to begin, he said, with random words, the first words that someone would ever speak. And you'll get this idea. He uses these low single attack sonorities, and those are the first words. But over the course of 4 minutes, he said he wanted a whole language to develop. And at the very end of the piece, you're left with this rather rich lexicon, and all these electronic sounds coming out of nowhere. So keep in mind what you're going to hear, the composer who in no time learned how to master this new technology that was at his disposal, something that he was not prepared to do at all coming from Hungary, but took to these new opportunities quite quickly. So this piece, Articulation, lasts for 4 minutes, and I just had to do a little setup. Oh, sure. Arrangement for accordion. right? So the next piece, we're going to make a big jump, not only in terms of geography, but in terms of style. This might be the one name that's probably least familiar to everyone on the program. The American composer Lamont Young is still with us, as you can see. And it brings us to the piece written in the 2 years covered by this exhibit. And Composition 1960, it's a whole set of works that Lamont Young did. And undertaking these works, he was inspired by his friend John Cage, and he was interested in Cage's more conceptual approach to composition, and also chance-derived pieces as well. So Composition 1960 is a cluster of pieces which he really called actions, not so much pieces, actions. What he does is he gives the performers instructions, and the performer follows those instructions out in some way. So there's like 18 pieces in this set altogether. We're going to be doing 2 of them, numbers 9 and 10, and they're related by the same idea. And that idea is that of a line, of a single line. And he liked that idea. He actually had a thing, he saw lines exist in time, and music exists in time. So he thought that's what would connect the two. And he could build off this idea of a line. So, Composition 1960, number 9. I'm going to show you the score for the piece. This is the score. It's an index card, and he tells you beforehand, before you perform it, to draw a straight line on an index card. And you are to respond to the line in any way you see fit. So we were inspired by that idea. So what we decided to do was bring up a bunch of students from the School of Music, and we all thought we'd stand in a line, and we would take our chance up the line and see what happens here. And I think you'll know how this piece ends. I won't tell you, but we do something appropriate to the idea of the piece overall. But I'm part of the line, so.
I'll just introduce the students. We have Claire Butterfield, Nathan Bossy, Michael Monroe, David Metzer, Rob Singley, and Christine Lanza, and Paul Leviser.
John Cage. Dorothy Norman invited me to dinner in New York. There was a lady there from Philadelphia who was an authority on Buddhist art. When she found out I was interested in mushrooms, she said, have you an explanation of the symbolism involved in the death of the Buddha by his eating a mushroom? I explained that I'd never been interested in symbolism, that I preferred just taking things as themselves, not as standing for other things. But then a few days later, when rambling in the woods, I got to thinking, I recalled the Indian concept of the relation of life and the seasons. Spring is creation, summer is preservation, fall is destruction, winter is quiescence. Mushrooms grow most vigorously in the fall, the period of destruction, and the function of many of them is to bring about the final decay of rotting material. In fact, as I read somewhere, the world would be an impassable heap of old rubbish were it not for mushrooms and their capacity to get rid of it. So I wrote to the lady in Philadelphia, and I said, the function of mushrooms is to rid the world of old rubbish. The Buddha died a natural death. We're going to continue with the next piece in the sequence, Composition 1960. I should say we're now doing Composition 1960, number 17. The action for number 17 is for the pianist to push the piano through a wall. So I decided we really wouldn't. Well, we will go ahead to number 9, which is also based on the idea of a line. And to do this piece, we're quite fortunate. We have Judy Sal, who's over there. So see her when she comes out. She is in the MFA program, and she's really the ideal person to do this piece. In her work in the MFA program, she's working on Fluxus artists, but she's also involved with music. She's working with the School of Music, Dr. Bob Pritchard, and she's doing sound-based pieces with him. So, as I said, perfect candidate for this, based in music and also based in art. So I'd like to give you an idea of what this piece is. It just has a rather straightforward direction for the performer, and it's this. Draw a straight line and follow. voice. Rather than an aura for the rest of this show here. All right, the next piece, we're turning to a Canadian composer, and that's Hugh LeCaine. And we're going to be dealing with one of the most famous pieces of early electronic music, and that's LeCaine's Dripsody from 1955. This is the other side of electronic music at the time. With Ligeti, composers were using these abstract materials, just electronic sound on its own. But there was a whole other approach, which was to use natural sounds, to record natural sounds, and then to manipulate those sounds and create a wealth of sounds from them. So this piece has the most simple origins possible. He recorded the sound of a drop of water. And from that one drop of water, he got all these other sounds by speeding up the tape, by slowing down the tape, by mixing, combining elements on the tape and doing all of that. So you have this rhapsody of drips that will last for 2 minutes. But at the time, it was quite a revolutionary piece and still makes quite an impact today. So I'm going to work with the player here. We were planning this concert, there was one piece I knew that I wanted to do right away. That's the next piece we're going to hear. This is Aria by John Cage. Let me just grab something here on our table. This is a piece that Cage wrote for the soprano Kathy Barbarian, who was probably the leading new music singer of that generation. And in this piece, Cage decided to give her this vehicle in which she could exercise all of her creativity and all her vocal prowess. The basic idea of the piece is this, and it helps if I show the score. This will give you a good example of Cage's graphic approaches to scores. So what you'll see are a bunch of shapes and different colors. And what the soprano is to do is she's supposed to sing a phrase that resembles that shape. And then what are the different colors? The colors are, there's 10 colors altogether, and she has to choose 10 different styles of singing, whatever suits her voice. And then she has to match each style with the color. So whenever you hit that color, you are to use that style of singing and bring that out. There's also some black squares on the page, and in the black squares, she has to do whatever she wants to do as long as it evokes a sound or is theatrically appropriate in some way, which is just Cage's way of saying whatever, and go about it at that. So this is a piece that calls upon a soprano with a lot of imagination, It also calls upon a soprano who is not shy. In fact, when we were kind of finding a singer for this, I said to Nancy Hermiston, who's the director of our opera program, I said, first thing is, cannot be shy. And she goes, I'm just the person. And so we actually do have just a person for us. It's a great pleasure to introduce Michaela Dickey, who's in our opera voice program, and she took to this piece so quickly and so beautifully, and it's been a pleasure to work on it with her for the last few weeks. And good chance for me to get to one of my favorite pieces and get to work with an imaginative performer at the same time.
Io posso amare totalmente solo dotato sia si rinuncia alla verità. été moyen typique et suprême ATDZU.
Ta prime toujours été que ce mot d'une langue humaine, GLNTB.
KAS, lesbos TO. The first sign, yet, as when he was not.
Lo spazio.
Il canto B. Mince.
Accord to la source possible. Legato as a GPS KA.
Say that did not last much longer, or lasted about 10 years longer, and then kind of ended abruptly. Many people here know that Guston changed his style, started to do a more figurative style. And one night in a bar, he said to Morton, he goes, "So what do you think of these new works of mine?" And as Morton later wrote, he goes, "My silence was perhaps a little too long." And that ended the relationship there for a while. But at this time, there was definitely affinity between them. And this is a piece that he wrote for Guston. And with the direction for the piece, it's to be played very quietly throughout. If you know Feldman's music, he does have these very long and very quiet pieces. This is a shorter piece, but it's meant to be very quiet throughout. The second piece is the one that perhaps everyone knew before they came here. It's much discussed, but rarely heard as in a performance. So we have the pleasure of hearing it in a performance today. So much ink has been spilled on this piece, so many things have been said about it. I'll just point out one thing, because you are going to hear a performance, and not many people expect this when you see a performance. But the piece does divide into 3 separate movements, which is not so well known. So Michael Monroe, our pianist, he's going to articulate the movements by tapping his lap. And so you'll see the division of the movements that way. So there are 3 separate movements in it. If you would like to say some more about the piece, feel free to talk to us afterwards about it. And then the last piece is by the composer Robert Pentland, who was teaching here at UBC during the 2 years covered by this show here. So it's a great pleasure to do some of her music. This is one of her better known pieces. One of the reasons it's become so famous is that Glenn Gould chose the piece for a collection he did of contemporary Canadian composers at the end of the 1960s. So he chose this piece by Barbara Pentland here. So 3 very diverse pieces, but we're in capable hands for them. Our pianist today is Michael Monroe, who's also another pianist who's devoted himself to contemporary repertoire, and a pianist who has, again, the imagination and the capability to pull off all 3 of these pieces. And Michael's also been saying that he's been dying for the chance to do 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So his moment has arrived. our big finale piece. And of course, we had to give the last word to John Cage. I knew right away when we heard what this exhibit was about that Cage would be featured. It's also a pleasure to do a lot of Cage because I know Scott Watson, director of the gallery, is a big admirer of John Cage. And it's music we don't get to hear too much. And as working with students in school, it's music that's never played much within the school either. So that was another reason to bring it back here as well. So the piece we're going to be doing is radio music from the late 1950s. And this is a piece for up to 8 radios. And why radios? I should say, Cage was a visionary composer, but he was also a resourceful visionary composer. He realized a lot of the ideas he had couldn't be realized, so he found some means to realize them. When he was writing in the 1930s about electronic music and wanted to have electronic instruments to create certain sounds, he didn't have those machines at the time. So what he decided to do was to use electronic appliances or electronic machines that he had at his disposal and use them in musical ways. And one of the things he used was the radio. So there are several works that feature radios. And he loved the sound of the radio. He said, one of my favorite sounds is the static and the noise you get when you change stations. And that noise you're going to hear in abundance here. So we're up to 8 radio players. We position ourselves around the hall here. And he's given us a series of directions of channels to tune to, also with periods of silence in between. And we are to get through those in a set sequence, and we're to decide how long we want to hold each channel. But there is, in terms of timing, there is one factor, and this is probably something you want to keep in mind when you're listening to it. The piece does have a set duration, and that is 6 minutes long. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. All right, so I have to get back to it.
Appropriate.
Music with the camera. come down, of course, and it's time for 3.5 minutes.
And if you'd like to talk to the musicians or just ask us about the pieces, feel free to. So thank you very much. Thank you.